Testing, testing. This is Stefano Virgili from VOX podcast, and together with me today, Diane Ha, our co-host, and Audrey Cheng from Moringa School. Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
Stefano.
You are both in Kenya, right?
Yes.
Well, one is indoor and the other is outdoor. I can see.
Exactly. So just to do a brief intro on Audrey. So this is Audrey Cheng. She's a friend and also the founder of Moringa School. And you can check them out at moringaschool.com. And so Moringa School is one of the rare and more established coding schools in Africa, I would say. So we are very lucky today to speak to the very busy Audrey Cheng. Why don't we start with tell us, the story behind your startup and how did you move from journalism to education?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for inviting me to be on this podcast today. So essentially, I guess my journey with Moringa School started in 2014. And so at that point, I was actually, working for a venture fund in Kenya called Savannah Fund. And so we invest in early stage tech companies across the continent. I think that experience was really eye-opening for me because my role was to help, source for deals, but also to continue to accelerate the growth of our existing portfolio. And so when I was really kind of on the ground, when I was working with entrepreneurs and understanding what the biggest challenges were to actually building a successful company, I realized that one of the biggest challenges was just around talent, right? So a lot of our companies, they just couldn't find the right talent, and especially in tech. And that's just a massive bottleneck to be able to actually, grow your business significantly. And so I think for me, the moment that it really kind of landed was when one of our companies approached me one day asking if, where they can find a strong developer and that, they had been looking for 6 to 9 months. And at that point he was considering, and ultimately he did decide to outsource his work to India. And so, I moved to Kenya originally because I was really excited about the idea of, sorry, my cat's tail, really excited about the idea of really supporting local talent to build their economies. So it, when I realized that actually the biggest bottleneck towards building businesses, creating more jobs was really about the skills and the talent, I realized that we had to start first from square one before we actually move forward. And so essentially, long story short, it was kind of a problem that I became really fascinated by. I had previously in different jobs here and there, worked in education, and just had never seen the kind of challenges that were here, right? So not only was education and curriculum in universities outdated, it was theoretical. We see that in other parts around the world, but on top of it, teachers, are constantly protesting because the system isn't really working for them either. And so generally, with all the challenges that students face, it does take on average about 5 years for university graduates to get a full-time job after they graduate. And so it's quite a big challenge. And on top of it, to actually get into university, only about 13% of students, secondary school graduates who actually pass the secondary school exam are able to get a spot in university because there just aren't enough spots either. And so I think that the problem in the transition from secondary to tertiary education is pretty massive. It was just a problem that I was really interested in solving and figuring out, can we actually build an alternative education system that is very necessary and needed? It's not a nice to have, but it's a need to have in these parts of the world. And so that's essentially how we started Moringa.
Very cool. That makes sense. Actually, when I'm thinking back to those days when I'm recruiting and looking at resumes, I see actually lots of gaps between school, college. College also takes potentially 10 years, a few years here, and you stop and work, and then a few years again. So that makes a lot of sense. But so you studied journalism, right? How did you, move from that, which is, I feel like it's entirely different to, starting Moringa School?
Yeah. So essentially, I guess the question is around like why, like how did I transition from journalism into, I guess, to work in Kenya and then eventually at Moringa. And so essentially, I studied journalism in university. So it was actually journalism and global health. And so, I think I'm still like, I love writing. Writing is still like my preferred way of communication. And so I guess like for me, like that was always a passion that I had and still continue to have. But like when it came to the practicalities of being a journalist, it actually meant I was writing about, quick turnaround stories. I was writing about problems as opposed to really being part of solutions. And for me, that wasn't fulfilling enough. And so, I started turning my eye more towards like how can we actually solve the problems I'm writing about. And so actually when I was at university, I spent a good amount of time working for startups, learning from incredible CEOs and other entrepreneurs, and really kind of got a lot of exposure into problem solving through that space. And I think on the side of why Kenya, so like I said, when I was in university, I also studied global health. And so for me, global health was really about realizing that a lot of money constantly gets poured into emerging markets every year, but the output of that money is generally low because of the expenses, operational expenses, and really not kind of solving for like the end user. And I realized that when you're working for a company or when you're building a company, like if we're not solving problems for our customers, then we go bankrupt. And so that's kind of how I kind of merged the two of wanting to be part of solutioning, but also wanting to actually build something where we're listening to the end user, we're building something for them as opposed to building solutions off of our own assumptions.
Interesting. That's a true entrepreneurial spirit that can't be fought with. Okay, so what's what can you tell us, whatever you can share, what is your secret sauce, or what makes Moringa more successful and well known than other tech and coding schools around here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think for one, we've survived, and so I think there, of course, in the last couple of years, there have been many times when I've also just thought like, okay, like I don't know if this can, like it just felt really challenging. But I think ultimately we just kept pushing and we kept solving really hard problems to get us to where we are today. And so even in our first year, like our first class was a class of 5 students, and our next class was a class of 11, then 12, then 20, right? So our first year, like we trained less than 50 people. And I think I've seen other programs also like across the continent also start and be like, wow, like we're not at the scale that Moringa is at, like it must not be working for us. But I think that the reality is that we also started quite small, but we just continue to keep listening to our students, like listening to our employers, and in that process continue to build like a stronger reputation over time. And so like even with Moringa, like our biggest marketing channel now is still word of mouth. So our students are telling their friends, our alumni as well, our Moringa parents are telling their friends, and so I think it's just like naturally like our network has grown because of our increase in the number of students every year. So I think that's definitely been a big one. I think also the other thing is that Moringa, since we started up until 2019, we were actually completely bootstrapped as a company. And so like, we were essentially still growing about like 100% year on year. But because we were bootstrapped, we had to be very careful about the way that we were spending money. So, really kind of deliberate on like, I think something that makes Moringa different as well is the fact that we've been bootstrapped from 2014 to 2019 when we raised our first round. So I think that created quite a lot of discipline around like, like where we actually invest. Every time we think about making a hire, it's, is this person really going to generate the ROI that we expect? Like in order to, obviously build the business and increase the impact that we're making. And so I think it made us a lot thriftier and also a lot more resourceful as well about how can we achieve the same outcome with less. And so we've always sort of had that mentality as an organization, and we continue to have it even though we've like now raised around both equity and also like through foundations as well. But it's something that's very important to us is that we do have like a strong and lean business model no matter when.
Interesting. That's amazing that you managed to go this far, so many years into the business, bootstrapping. And is that when you talked about the challenges at the beginning, is that why the challenges of being able to grow or being able to market widely That's mostly what you're referring to, is it?
So I guess our challenges in the beginning, I mean, I think we definitely had a lot. So when we started, I mean, obviously we were a very small team. We were paying all of our teachers like way below market rate, just because we didn't have the cash flow to actually afford. So again, it was a lot of negotiation with some of our starting team members, who really just believed in our mission and our vision. And so, I think like those are some challenges. I think other challenges, of course, were that we were, running our course while we were also building it. And so, we were like still building curriculum up until the day that we were actually teaching courses. And so, that became challenging. It was just really like doing everything at once. And so, so I think definitely a good number of challenges. So I think end of the day, like we always tried to stay as focused as we could. Because we were a small team, because we were trying to do a lot with just a few people, and so I think it did help us like build the culture that we have today.
Interesting. Wow, must have been an amazing, like, adventurous past several years for you. Stefano, do you have any questions for Audrey?
Yeah, a couple of questions. One, I would like to know what's the name Moringa means.
Sure. So the Moringa plant is actually native to native to Kenya and other kind of parts of the world. And so for us, like, Moringa is supposed to be a super plant. And similarly, we wanted Moringa to also be like a super school, because we felt like one of the biggest pain points in society is really about like, the lack of like truly market aligned and quality education. And so that's why, that's what we called it Moringa School.
Understand. I also come from education background. I used to train. I used to have a training center in Singapore. And I started the training center as well, bootstrapping. I remember I was admin, marketer, trainer. I was doing everything. Then slowly grew to a team larger and larger. And at a point, I was no longer a trainer, which was the reason why I started a training center to start with. I enjoyed the training part. So the question for you is, first of all, if you are a trainer, and secondly, if you are now being just a manager and you miss training in case you used to train before.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think when we started, so I personally, like, I do have somewhat of a tech background. It's been a number of years since I've actually been working on that side, which is ironic, but but most of my background is more on like the business admin side. So even in the very beginning, like my co-founder and some of our trainers, like they were a lot more technical than I was. So they were actually driving that part of the training, and the training that I was really driving was more on like soft skills side and making sure our students were well equipped to be able to succeed once they start interviewing with employers. And so I think in many ways I do miss more closer interaction with students, and like just being able to really check in and really know like how their journey is and really feel that the direct impact that I'm making on their lives, as opposed to as you mentioned, like quite a lot of the admin and the strategy and the higher level business work that I'm currently focused on and driving now. But that being said, I think in every part of the journey I've really kind of enjoyed what the new learning curve will be and look like. And so I guess as much as I do miss not being able to be closer to students, I also am enjoying being able to learn like a new set of like mindsets and skills to really drive our mission forward.
Interesting. I remember those moments where we started growing larger, much larger than we expected. We didn't even have enough computers for the students. We had to buy the computers as they were enrolling. And so I totally feel the same way when it was about how to spend the money wisely and how to make the best of the cash flow. I want to ask you also something about the curriculum. For instance, in our training center, I remember we started with 8 courses, which I was teaching entirely. We ended up with 54 different courses, completely different curriculum, even in totally different direction. Like we never taught 3D until 2 years into the business. We started integrating social media and other things that were not considered part of our core mission at the beginning. So the first question is, number one, how many curriculums you have and how often do you update them? The second question is, when you update your courses, do you also integrate new knowledge and new programs, new languages?
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, I think I missed the first question.
Yeah, the first question. The first question was how often do you update your curriculum, and currently how many curriculums you have? And the second part is when you update your curriculum, do you also add new courses and integrate new technology, or you just refurbish the existing curriculums?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have, a product and learning team at Moringa. And so, the product team is really about, are we meeting the students' expectations? Like, what are the new opportunities coming down the pipeline? And our learning team is really about, designing the pedagogy and the full learning experience. Really thinking about, our teachers, like what their role is in the classroom, thinking about our, obviously our curriculum and how up to date it is. And so, yeah, our learning team definitely does get inputs from our outcomes team, which does, has quite a lot of interactions with employers. And so, we do have like a backlog of input and feedback from employers on how to make our curriculum better and stronger. And so our curriculum it's almost like a live curriculum that's constantly being updated because, obviously technology trends are changing quite quickly. There's constantly like software updates that we have to be aware of to update our curriculum. And so, our programs right now are in software development and data science. And what we found is that, those two topics in and of themselves are quite broad. And there's a lot of different, customer segments that are interested in, receiving that type of education in various ways. And so, what we're looking at, at that potentially more as a differentiator over, moving quickly into other curriculums.
Can you share some numbers on the longevity of your students once they take the first course? How long is the average course? Do they come back to take another course subsequently? Do you build a sort of a loyalty with the employer so that all the new hire will come through your company through their learning journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially our courses, we have a software development course, which is 20 weeks long. So that includes a 5-week prep course and a 15-week core. Usually, for our students who are low income, they'll come for a course that's pre-prep. So then their whole experience is about 24 weeks long. And then for our data science course, with our prep and core is 23 weeks. So our data science course is longer, and our programs run from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. And so it is a full-time, very intensive program that's really focused on our brand promise around employability. So I think, especially when it comes to training talent in these markets, I think some of the baseline skills that you might kind of expect from students in the US or in Europe because of certain types of education, we need to actually spend time building that foundation before students can really embark on their software development journey or data science journey. And so our focus really is on how do we kind of transform our talents and our students to be able to actually find full-time employment afterwards and to build a better life for themselves. And so that's why our courses are longer and also fairly intense.
What type of accreditation you give to your students? Is a diploma or a certificate?
So essentially, we are accredited with the Technical and Vocational Education Training Authority in the Kenyan government. So students are able to get certificates. I think it's interesting because when we started, students were really concerned about wanting a certificate. But as our brand has grown over time, especially among employers and students and parents, it's still an interest of is it possible for us to get a diploma through Moringa? But really, what we've heard is that students are coming to our programs regardless of knowing whether or not they'll get a certificate, etc. So I think it's just the fact that has grown over time.
Yeah, I share the same experience on that. In fact, the training center that I established in Singapore initially had the word school in the denomination, but as the branding grew and we started working with more and more international customers, then we removed the word school, and our certificate of attendance had a branding value that was somehow even more powerful than other competitors that they were providing accredited certification, also because the training method was completely different compared to the others. And that's where I wanted to also ask you the next question. Then Diana, I will hand it over to you again. In terms of curriculum development, what type of tools do you utilize? Do you use technology? Do you provide textbooks? Do you provide mobile phones for them to test their outputs? What type of support? Do you have labs? Do you have multiple classrooms? If you can describe how the school looks like, because I see that you are in the hundreds in terms of employees. So I'm imagining the school to be quite big, and how many branches you have and how does it work?
Sure. So Moringa School, we have 2 campuses. So we have our main campus is in Kenya, and we have another in Rwanda. So in terms of how our education works, so we do have a blended like offline online approach, which I think will definitely be more pushed towards online with coronavirus. And so essentially before coronavirus, students were coming to our program, like our actual campus every day from 8 a.m. To 6 p.m. And so when students come in, they would essentially do a daily stand-up. So really talking about what they learned the day before, what they're learning today, and what challenges that they had from the day before. And so the rest of the day, students are actually learning through our learning management system. And so, they're working individually or working in groups to actually build on their portfolio. And so we would have sprints from Monday and Tuesday, another sprint from Wednesday and Thursday. And then we have like a full day of independent projects on Friday. So they can really significantly add to their portfolio. And so essentially our teachers at Moringa are more like facilitators or mentors as opposed to traditional teachers. And so we have at most like a 5% teaching time. And most of the day students are actually working through our learning management system and actually like contributing to their portfolio. And so interwoven in that, which I think is also quite important, is a good amount of soft skills training as well, which we try to kind of introduce like just in time. And so, for example, when we know that there is like a spike in our curriculum and that's more difficult, we'll maybe like, run a workshop on imposter syndrome. And so, we do try to get a lot of data back from our students to know, like, what are the peaks? How do we actually really make sure students are feeling emotionally and psychologically supported during this period as well, given how difficult the experience is. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
Indeed, absolutely. Thank you for answering. Diane, back to you.
Thanks. So Audrey was wondering, what do your students look like? Are they, it sounds like maybe they're mostly not post high school, maybe they have some work experience, or, is it post college, before pre-college? And you also have a reputation for developing more females, more women than males, I guess. I mean, because females here or women here actually have quite a big disadvantage, especially with education.
Yeah, definitely. So essentially our student makeup is a third of our students are secondary school graduates, and 2/3 are either in university or have graduated from university. And so, like we actually, depending on like the time of year, because in Kenya, when students graduate from secondary school, sometimes they have between 9 to 12 months before they start university. And so, we do see like a spike in secondary school graduates attending our programs because of like their kind of their break. I guess in terms of the women's side, so our management team at Moringa is almost all women, and so which like wasn't necessarily like fully intentional to say like we only wanted all women, but it just turned out that that like the best candidates we found were women for those roles. And so naturally, I think we do try to, obviously we do check in on like gender parity and making sure that we are really championing certain measures around diversity. Within our classrooms and within our teams. And so, like previously in the past, like we've run programs that were like full female boot camps as well. In Rwanda, mostly because of our funder, we are running like, full female programs. And so actually in Rwanda, we haven't actually trained any males yet. And so, so Rwanda is full female, and then Kenya is definitely still a mix.
Wow, great. Okay, so we talked a lot about the curriculum. Can you give us an idea? I mean, I guess it's probably varied. I'm wondering about the price or the cost. for someone to join. And I know you said, depending on what programs they take and how long it is, but can you give us a range?
Yeah, so our program, so for software development, our program is about $1,800 for a 5-month course.
Okay. And is that relatively cheap in this space? Or I'm not very well versed in the pricing of these, of education here actually, but it seems quite decent.
Yeah, definitely. So generally, we are targeting more like middle and upper class parents. And so, like if you look at the pricing, even when it comes to like a private, it is pretty on par in terms of the amount of time it is, and what parents usually pay for about a 6-month program. And so, we are priced to be more at the level of private university. So if you look at Strathmore University, they could charge like, depending on the course, they can charge like $200,000 or even higher for a semester. Which is actually, like more expensive than our program as well. And so, I think especially like in Kenya, like there's such a high value and like place on education, especially around quality education. And so it's something that, people are willing to take out loans for and really do see like a clear return on investment for. And so, I think for us, like, because we've been able to deliver on the expectations that our students and parents have set for us, that we're still able to get students to join our programs. Mm-hmm.
Audrey, to keep things in context, you mentioned 200,000, that's Kenyan shillings, I guess.
Shillings. So that's
yes,
$2,000.
yeah, sorry, yeah.
Which is equivalent to pretty much how much in US dollars?
About $2,000.
Okay, so it's pretty much aligned to the price that you are charging, or slightly more expensive. Your competitors are slightly more expensive. That's what you want to say, right? Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So who would you consider your competitors?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I was speaking with one of our alumni yesterday who was asking me like why Moringa didn't have any competitors, and I was like, oh, it's interesting, like from a alumni perspective, that they would say that. Honestly, I think like I mentioned, like in the last few years, there have been some like smaller programs across the continent that have started up, but we haven't seen any programs kind of reach the scale that we've reached in Kenya. And so I guess in terms of competitors, like, previously we might have said, universities, like maybe as like secondary competitors. There are other kind of programs like that were more like software development shops like Indela, that were also pooling from like the same candidates. But in reality right now, because Indela is not running any more trainings, like we're essentially just pipeline partners for them and also for employers as well. And so we haven't seen, like many others, like especially at our scale, that we would consider competitors.
Can you share some success stories in terms of your students and your employer? Eventually, did you manage to solve the problem that you wanted to solve? Your idea was to solve the problem of sourcing talents for employer. Now, six years down the road, share with us some success stories from both sides.
So essentially in terms of our success stories at Moringa, so I think we have a ton of success stories from our very first cohort all the way to the last cohort that we've graduated. And so an example of a student from our first cohort was a student who was a secondary school graduate. And so generally in Kenya, for employers, it's quite difficult to find, to be able to hire people who don't have a university graduate. And so, her concern was quite valid. And so I remember the couple weeks leading up to the graduation, she was still feeling like, look, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find employment, et cetera, et cetera. And so after, she actually ended up receiving about 5 to 6 job offers from really great companies in Kenya. And then beyond that as well, if you look at where she is today, she's like a senior software developer. She's worked at some of like the most, reputable tech companies in Kenya. And continues to find a lot of opportunities elsewhere as well. We've also had a couple of, not a couple, but we've had some graduates as well who've of course found employment at the likes of Safaricom and other kind of big companies in Kenya, but we've also had some who have moved abroad to find other opportunities. And so I was just speaking with one of our alumni the other day who's actually now in Germany, working as a software developer for a company there. And so it's been really kind of amazing to see our alumni really go kind of like far and wide. I guess another one that's a little bit random was, I was speaking at the Harvard Africa Business Conference last year. And, I was just meeting with a couple of people. And I remember, this one gentleman comes up to me and it's like, hey, are you from Moringa? And it turned out that he was actually one of our alumni. And he was then an undergraduate at Harvard. And he had told me that, before, even applying for college, he just wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. And, since Moringa School, he was able to find consulting opportunities. So he was still working while being a student at Harvard and was pursuing a degree in computer science. And so, yeah, I think we've just had a lot of just really kind of inspiring stories of students who really were able to find their potential through our program at Moringa.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Diane, any question from you?
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that COVID affected the business. Can you tell us, positively, negatively, what were the impacts of COVID on Moringa School?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, on March 15th, the Kenyan government announced school closures. And so that meant that immediately, we had to start shifting everything online. And so we had originally anticipated that it would take a couple weeks before the government would actually shift things and make that call. But they were really kind of swift to responding to the first case of COVID. And so it meant that, we needed within a week's time to move everything online. And so our team worked overtime. We this really just made sure that, we're able to really transition our experience online effectively. Luckily for us, because we were and we are very tech enabled, it wasn't as difficult for us as potentially other schools. And so we were able to, train our teachers in how do you actually create engaging environments online, build curriculum for our students on how do you actually transition to an online learning platform, and how do you continue to get the most value out of your education. And so we had a lot of success there where we had over about an 88% retention of students from our offline program to online, which I think was very overwhelmingly positive for us. And so, we're still obviously our program's not perfect online, but we're still working out the kinks and making sure that we can continue to deliver on student expectations. I think the other challenge, I think by and large, is just the fact it's more of a global challenge, is that economies globally are shrinking, and the number of jobs, especially in these markets, is also shrinking. And so I think one of our challenges now is figuring out how can we link our students to other different types of opportunities. So if it's not formal employment, is it freelancing? Is it remote work for companies elsewhere? And so that is a lot of the research and the work that we're driving on our teams, just to kind of understand, how can we continue to ensure that students can succeed after a program.
Have you experienced so far any of your students going solo, starting their own startup and launching their own application? Can you make some examples?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think in our program for both our software development and data science program, at the very end, we have a 3-week project period where students are actually building apps and building projects to problems that they identify. So it's either that or they go through an employer-centered ideation project where employers are giving problem statements and students are actually building for employers. And so, we have had a number of graduates actually take their projects and try to start companies with them. I think obviously as Moringa, we're not teaching, skills and entrepreneurship. So, we're only teaching part of the equation of building a company. And so, it has been of interest to us of thinking about how can we support our students who are building companies to actually, acquire the right kind of skills in order to do so. And so it's more of a longer term project, but it's definitely something we're interested in.
Do you have any platform where employers can see the alumni and contact them directly for making them offers? How does it work? You take that stake in the ecosystem, or you are not involved in that?
Definitely. So essentially employers generally reach out to us directly. So either our like contact us at moringa.com email or just like through someone they know at Moringa. And so that's generally how it works. And we have a core team that actually deals with employers and make sure that, you know, we are able to meet their expectations when they're looking for talent.
Thanks for sharing that.
Perfect. So I guess I have a last question here. You were talking a little bit about the future for Moringa. Wanted to hear your take on where do you see Moringa School in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, I think that that's part of the process that actually we're undergoing now to define that, you know, together with our exco, with our broader team and also our board. And so, you know, I think for us, like we're seeing a lot of really interesting opportunities during this period because, you know, we have especially Kenyan students in other parts of the continent who are taking part in our education because now it's fully online, like they can actually, you know, access our program in ways that they couldn't before. So we are seeing opportunities to look, you know, beyond Kenya and to build a more scalable and leaner model of education delivery. And so, you know, I think we're quite excited about that. We're excited about our, you know, continuous interest in corporate training and also the way that our students and parent sentiment and behavior might be changing during this period to really kind of be more open to online learning. And so, you know, I think, of course, some of the risks that we're seeing as well is just like, you know, generally, if the economy continues to shrink, you know, there's less money in the economy, like how much students and parents will really be able to pay. And so we are thinking a lot about, you know, like how can we make sure that we do understand how the world is changing and how, you know, our product and our delivery for students needs to change with it as well. And so, you know, again, just we probably now still have more questions than answers, but we're trying to, you know, set up a process in which we can start answering some of our big questions.
Makes sense. But I mean, yeah, it feels like the COVID forced shift is actually, you know, it's turning out to be positive. It's forcing you guys to get online. It's opening up more newer markets. Yes, the job market is changing, but, you know, even though employment rates are increasing, I think it's just changing. We just need to understand what are the different jobs that are going to be in demand versus, you know, what we had before, which could be more like technical, more coding based, more, you know, more targeted to actually to your graduates. Okay, so I know we're running short on time here. Wanted to give you a minute or two to do a shout out, to do
one last question. Allow me to ask.
Oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Audrey, I wanted to actually share an information, but at the same time ask you a question. I have launched a startup that is operating in Uganda, so I'd love to definitely stay in contact with you and understand if you have students from Uganda or in Uganda that you're currently training, and I would like to be in contact with that. And before we give you the last minute for your last message, I also wanted to ask you in terms of investment. You say that you have you have done some raising last year. So in your last minute, if you want to include also a word for investors and how you would like to involve investors in your business, not only that, but also if you want to talk to our audience and share with them whatever information you want to share about your school for onboarding or the type of culture and philosophy that you are sharing besides the coding itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I guess just to answer your question about kind of our general investment history. So, you know, last year we did raise our first round, our seed round from, you know, DOB Equity, Proparco, Savannah Funds, Entangled Ventures in the US. So you know, we did have a number of really strong investors for our seed round. And we also brought in MasterCard Foundation as a really big partner for us to continue to scale up our work in Kenya. And so, yeah, so I think for us, you know, I do think, as per like Diane's like last question about the opportunities in COVID, I do think that the opportunities are absolutely there, but we just need to be able to capture them. And so, you know, I think when we think about, you know, originally we were going to raise our Series A this year, and we're still testing to see if that's possible or if we want to push it to next year. But I think in general, you know, we do see quite a lot of opportunities that we want to be able to move fast on. And you know, in general, we're always looking for more partners to do that.
Great. So your last minute, share with the audience what you want to share. If you want to talk about your upcoming programs or your next intake, feel free to share with our audience, and share also the touch point. So far, we have mentioned the website, if there is any other way to get in contact with you.
Sure, absolutely. So people have any kind of specific questions or comments or thoughts or opportunities? It will be great if people can reach out to our email on moringaschool.com, or reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. I try to be semi-active on LinkedIn, so yeah, so happy to engage with people that way. But in general, thank you so much for these questions and inviting me on this podcast. Yeah, it's great to chat with both of you.
And thank you for your time. Every question you start your answer by saying definitely, definitely. So I'm sure you are a person that knows exactly what you want, and I'm sure that you're gonna go ahead with a bright success ahead.
Thank you for your time, Audrey. It was interesting hearing so much more about Moringa, because I've heard so much from the grapevine, so much from people who have graduated and people who want to apply, all good things. So it's nice to look under the hood and hear about your story.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.